Time no longer, Chapter 4, Part B, Seals. The first three horses lasted for much shorter periods. Babylon gained control of the world about 600 BC. This white horse ruled for a century. The Chaldeans captured the city of Nineveh, the capital of Assyria, in 612 BC. The Hebrew Empire then came crashing down in 606 BC when Jerusalem fell and the Hebrews were taken into captivity into Babylon. Daniel was among these captives. Babylon became one of the largest cities in the ancient world, comprising some 25,000 acres. It was also one of the richest of all kingdoms. Its posh and glamour were unparalleled. The hanging gardens of Babylon were deemed one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. Babylon's ascendancy to the forefront of the ancient world was rapid, but her glory was short-lived, in fact the smallest of the four horses. Cyrus the Great defeated the first Ionians and then the Babylonians in 538 BC. The Persians reigned over the entire world from Egypt to India. His kingdom, represented by a red horse, ruled the world for 2 centuries. There were many attempted coups and revolts, but as Daniel predicted, none were successful. However, Philip II of Macedonia took control of all Greece in 338 BC. By this time in history, the world's population had grown by leaps and bounds. The population of Greece alone at that time is estimated to be some 4 million people. It took great sums of money, even in those days, to outfit and run an army. Philip had to make use of the newly discovered gold deposits to support such an army. With these funds, he constructed the greatest fighting machine the world had ever seen up to that point in time. These armies were composed of not only citizens of the mother country, but also of many mercenaries who required payment as well. Philip announced a crusade against the hated Persians in 338 BC, but he was assassinated 2 years later. His son Alexander ascended the throne and assumed personal command of the army. He was without doubt the greatest general of his age and possibly in the history of the world. Alexander's army was unparalleled for its organization, speed, and ability to adjust to the varying venues and diverse opponents of battle. Alexander first defeated the Persians in 334 BC at the Battle of Granicus near modern-day Istanbul. With lightning speed, especially for the time, he moved east. The Battle of Issus pitted Alexander's 100,000 men versus Darius, king of Persia's 500,000. Darius' army was soundly defeated, and in 331 BC at the Battle of Gaugamela, the Persian army was demolished, and with it the Medo-Persian Empire. Alexander continued the march eastward, winning battle after battle until he reached the borders of India. The forces of man could not stop him, but the forces of nature had an easier time. Alexander died of fever in 323 BC. His kingdom was divided between his 4 leading generals, as prophesied by Daniel in Daniel 6:6. The death of Alexander led inevitably to the downfall of the black horse and to the rise of an even more sinister stallion. This new steed was pale in color and is equated with hell and death by Daniel. The Romans began a systematic plan to assume world control. They first defeated the fragmented Greeks and then decisively defeated the army of Hannibal at the Battle of Zama in 202 BC. This brought all of Carthage, including Spain, under Roman rule. With North Africa and Western Europe now under their iron grip, the Roman legions turned east and took control of Palestine, Persia, and Asia. Revelation 6:8 indicates that this pale horse will rule over a fourth part of the earth, and indeed it does. From Spain to India, Rome ruled the world. This mastery continued for over 600 years. Rome is characterized as killing with not only the sword, but with hunger and with beasts of the earth. And in fact, sieges of enemy cities were common, as was the practice of throwing Christians and other undesirables to the lions. Way back in Daniel's time, we read of the first account of this cruel pagan custom. To Rome also was given the awful task of crucifying the Son of Man. What a terrible fate! God knew only the cruelest and most vile power could and would put the Son of their Creator to death. Thus another essential piece of the prophetic puzzle was fulfilled. Rome outdid the other three horses combined in terms of longevity. Its cruelty was also unmatched by the other three. Even after its political unraveling and demise as a world power in AD 476, it had left a legacy that can be seen today. A brief trip to the city of Rome today will enlighten the traveler as to both the glory and infamy of what was once the most dominant empire in the world. Thus, the first four seals of Prophecy 2 describe the four great world empires. The fifth seal depicts the persecution and martyrdom of God's people through a little season. This season takes us up to the year 1798 AD. The year 1798 marks the time of the end in Bible prophecy. The sixth seal is announced by a great earthquake. Then the sun is blackened, the moon is darkened, and the stars fall from heaven. There are well-documented historical events that coincide in a relatively small time frame with these occurrences. The great earthquake of 1755 was like no other, described before or since. Its scope encompassed 4 million square miles of the Earth's surface. More than half the city of Lisbon's inhabitants perished, and the city of Algiers on the northern coast of Africa was flattened. Mountains in Portugal were split wide apart, and a Mexican village of 10,000 people was literally swallowed up. 60-foot tidal waves were reported in many areas of the world. In Loch Lomond, Scotland, the water level rose 2.5 feet and then receded to normal levels. The major part of civilization at the time was literally shaken as a child being scolded. Lest we forget, 4,000 years earlier God had destroyed the earth by water. By the time this point in history had rolled around, he had even more reason to do so. Among all the atrocities man had committed, the most heinous was the crucifixion of his Son. Yet he restrained his power and, yes, his anger at humanity. At the time of the flood, all but Noah had turned against him. By 1755, he had several millions of believers, many already in heaven, whom he must protect to carry on his work. And of course there was the ultimate gamble of the ages. He sent his only begotten Son to win humanity's trust and preserve his authority, thus preserving life itself. I look at an earthquake as a sign more than a shift of the earth's plates. I look at an earthquake as a sign of frustration on the part of God. A God of unlimited power will have unlimited levels of frustration. In studying the history of the human race, we find it is no wonder. Only the most patient God could exercise enough restraint not to wipe out every trace of human comedy. Man, with devil's help, has contrived and executed every sin possible and continues to dream up new ones every day. The latest sin developed by man is the use and abuse of mind-altering drugs. Only God knows what man will come up with next. We know of God's personality and emotion. Evidence of it sprinkled throughout the pages of the Bible, and we see it every day in the world of nature. We know he wept and showed his anger to Moses and others in Bible accounts. There was a great earthquake when Jesus died, most certainly not a coincidence. On occasion, God becomes so frustrated with humans that he takes control. He doesn't lose control, he just takes over for a while. Historically, this is seen in some of the great battles of the world. He forestalls man's penchant for vicious killing by utilizing nature's force. The Battle of Gettysburg in the American Civil War is arguably one of the most bloody in recorded history. The North and South slugged it out for 3 days and were prepared to go on at one another until only one man was left standing. But God intervened, and there was no fourth day. A steady rain put a merciful end to the carnage. The Battle of Trafalgar was most certainly one of the bloodiest of all sea battles ever fought. The British forces under Admiral Nelson were pitted against the inferior forces of Napoleon's French and Spanish fleet. Admiral Nelson orchestrated a great victory on October 21, 1805. Immediately after this bloody conflict, the wind came up and a fierce storm raged for 7 days, bringing the conflict to an abrupt end. There is no other storm of such severity and length recorded in the history of the region. God felt he had to stop the bloodshed, and so he did. And on November 1, 1755, a great earthquake shook the planet. And on May 19, 1780, the sun and the moon were darkened, despite it being a bright spring day. That night there was a full moon, but it was made dark by the Creator. The event was made visible primarily along the entire east coast of the United States, where the majority of its inhabitants lived at the time. It also occurred only a few short years after American independence. During this era, the torch of human power was slowly moving west. God gave the main body of this rising nation in prophetic sign to fulfill this 2,000-year-old prophecy. He further heralded the future on November 13, 1833, with a meteor shower viewed all over North America. These events highlight two very important time periods. One was the years before the end of the 1260-year prophecy, AD 538 to 1798. This period commenced with the establishment of Papal Rome as not only a religious power but as a civil power as well. This period of time is encompassed by the fifth seal of Revelation 6:9. It commences with the fall of pagan Rome and ends with the fall of Papal Rome. The deadly wound inflicted by Napoleon in 1798 brought down the papacy as a civil power. The second time period is that of the 2300-day prophecy of Daniel 8:14, which ended in 1844. This prophecy seal opens the time of the end by describing three supernatural events, all occurring at about the time of the end, which begins in 1798. The entire 7th chapter of Revelation discusses the sealing of the saints. However, this is also given as a time when the four angels hold the four winds of the earth, preventing its destruction. We follow chronologically, this time of the sealing of the saints also falls in the period after 1798. The act of holding back the four winds of strife is later rediscussed by John. The sealing of the 144,000 occurred after 1798. In the Bible prophecies, 1 being equal to 1,000 is an equation used numerous times by the prophets. In 2 Peter 3:8, we are given one example. Putting the number 144,000 into the above equation, we arrive at the number of 144 million. Each tribe of the Jewish race is said to have been sealed. This would allow for the sealing of 144 million Jews, or 12 million per tribe. God thus rewards the faithful of his chosen race prior to the final resurrection of all mankind. Let us remember that this is the race that chose God. From Abraham to Noah to David, the Jews alone stuck with God through thick and thin. This is a race long persecuted and oppressed and cursed, if you will, for rejecting God's Son, despite his being a product of that race. In any event, 144 million is a conceivable population of Jews built up over the time from Jacob until 1844. Immediately after this event, John saw the numberless multitudes from every nation, kindred, tongue, and people standing before God. This numberless throng may have also been sealed as saints at that time. Our God is a God of order and purpose. We see it time and time again in the acting out of history on the world stage. He seals the saints of his chosen race in orderly fashion, but he does not forget the remainder of the world. There are God-fearing people found in every race, creed, religion, and country. Therefore God seals those as well and sweeps the entire multitude up to heaven to be in his presence. What a privilege that is! These saints gave the supreme sacrifice of their lives for him. As God had promised, their reward is great. They have not only the most awesome privilege of being with God in heaven, but also the little extra sidelight. They are able to witness live the final acts of the world history as they are played out on the stage of this tired, old planet.